voting, sex, and money. Oh my. 10 days left until the election, and it's getting real ugly out there. We got a lot to cover tonight. There's no time to waste, so let's get ready for the For Virginia podcast. Thanks and welcome to the For Virginia podcast for the week ending October 29th. This is show number 11, 10 days to Election Day. I'm your host, Michael Brendan Wade. Thanks for tuning in. For Virginia is a Virginia State Political Action Committee focused on supporting progressive causes and candidates at the local and state level. Our weekly podcast is meant to provide you with news and analysis of politics across the state, helping you get the information you need to be an informed citizen, battle right-wing propaganda, and help progressives organize and activate where we are most needed. I'm basically trying to squeeze in a week's worth of news into a half hour to hour podcast. I think I probably go through about 250 headlines in a week, reading the articles and trying to provide you guys with the most pertinent information going on. Now, normally I would love to focus on policy and stuff like that, but like there is so much scandal going on this week that it is just unbelievable. We're going to talk about Joe Morrissey in Richmond in a little bit, cover the recent brouhaha over Governor McAuliffe's donations that got him into hot water over the Clinton email scandal. But first, we're going to talk about updates on news items that we've talked about in previous weeks. And then later in the show, we're going to get into some information about voting, registrations, and so forth, and hopefully some good news at some point. So again, we thank you for tuning in. As always, we'd like to ask that you go to our website at forvirginia.org, where we post show notes with links to all of the articles that we reference in the show. Please share this podcast on social media, follow us on Facebook, and help us get the word out. We'd love to hear some feedback from you guys about how we're doing, how we can be better, what you like and don't like, etc. You can email info@forvirginia.org or contact us on Facebook if you'd like to get in touch with us or like to help out. And if you do want to help support us, please head over to our Act Blue page and make a donation. Thanks again for all your support. So a few months ago, we told you about a Loudoun County school board member who was arrested at a Trump rally. Joy Maloney was arrested for trespassing after she allegedly cut in line. She claims that she had stepped out of the line with some friends to do a Facebook interview and had stepped back in, and some people that were behind her got mad. They tried to get her to leave, and she refused to, so she kind of just sat down and refused to leave until she was carted off or whatever. We actually gave her fame back in August for doing this, for stepping up and exercising her Second Amendment rights. She says that she was trying to find out why people in her community actually supported Trump, and so she actually had tickets for the events and everything like that. Apparently, because of the contract with these public school systems, they had only reserved the auditorium, and because she was outside of the auditorium, it was technically still public property, and she was therefore not trespassing. So, technicality, she gets off, charges her job, she goes on with her life apparently, and everybody's happy, right? Great. We've also been covering for the past month or so Virginia budget shortfall of $1.6 billion and how the state has planned to recoup that by laying off people, I think of the Library of Virginia, stopping raises and so forth. So a state legislative panel on employee compensation wants Governor McAuliffe to reinstate raises for state employees, college faculty, and state-supported local employees in the next budget year. The revenue shortfall will require more than $654 million in cuts for the fiscal year beginning July 1st. House Speaker William Howell, a Republican, is also considering a recommendation to require future governors to include performance-based raises for state employees. that are equal to the cost of living in the preceding 2 years. This is from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Now, in spite of that $654 million cut that's going to be needed in the budget, the Board of Education is actually going to be asking for almost $600 million in increased staffing costs at K through 12 schools to hire more assistant principals, school nurses, social workers, counselors, and office staff around the state to fill a budget hole that has lingered in the state's K through 12 budget since the Great Recession. This is from the Daily Press. And it's not going to happen. For those of you that aren't aware, Virginia actually has a balanced budget requirement in the state constitution. So we're in a real bind here on how we're going to be able to balance the budget for the 2017 fiscal year. It's going to be tough. It's going to be real tough. This Daily Press article has a lot of stuff about the standards of quality, which I don't have time to get into right now, but you should definitely check it out if you're interested in education. Also like to remind people about something we reported on earlier. Daily Press touches on about the Virginia State Police, who are also seeking new funding because of their staffing shortages. Local police departments usually pay better than the state agency's $36,000 starting salary, which is, if you're thinking about being a state trooper for $36,000 a year versus going and being a local cop somewhere for more. Yeah. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be real tough. Probably one of the biggest crises facing the state in the next year. I'm sure it's going to be critical in 2017's election next November. And as a reminder of what may be things to come, we've talked at length about Petersburg and their ongoing city financial crisis. We talked about, I think last week, we talked about a contested city council vote where they basically handed over control of city administrative duties, city manager duties rather, to a group called the Robert Bob Group. Bob was an emergency manager for Detroit, I believe. And they're running Petersburg now. So they had a huge budget shortfall, behind $3.5 million as of the last report from the Richmond Times. Won't get into the controversy behind the vote, whether it violated, council rules and everything like that. Petersburg began the fiscal year $19 million in arrears and $12 million over budget. The city council raised taxes, slashed more than $3 million in funding from the city's schools, actually used summer program, and shuttered cultural sites to make the difference. And they've basically paying this group over $300,000 in order to try and get things back in line. I'm probably dating myself here, but I'm pretty sure this was how the original RoboCop movie started in Detroit. I kid, but if the state can't bring their budget under control, what's to say that they're not going to bring in some outside group and pull some kind of, who knows? I mean, I just hope that we can I hope Petersburg can turn it around. I hope Virginia can save itself before things get too crazy, because who knows where this is going. And regular listeners of this show will know we've talked about Eastern State Hospital, Mental Hospital, and how it relates to the Hampton Roads Regional Jail and the spate of inmate deaths, including Jamichael Mitchell. This week we found out through call him a whistleblower, a longtime employee told a General Assembly committee that employees were regularly exhausted from overtime hours and that this information was not included in reports regarding Mitchell's death as well as other individuals. One person in particular, one hospital worker in particular, logged 127 hours of overtime in a 4-week period. That is 4 weeks of 70-hour weeks on average. 127 hours in 4 weeks. I know I would be brain dead if I tried to pull some hours like that. Couldn't do it. In a review following Mitchell's death, the hospital said nearly a dozen misplaced transfer faxes for various patients were discovered in a now retired, Eastern State employee's death. Mitchell basically wasted away in his cell, lost 40 pounds, and died apparently in covered in his own feces or something like that, because he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia or some other serious mental illness, and he had the judge's approval, an order to be moved to Eastern State, and the order was lost in a desk. They found it in a desk after his death. And it's not just Jamichael Mitchell. We told you about Henry C. Stewart, who actually filed emergency requests for medical treatment before he was found dead in his jail, in his cell at the Hampton Roads Regional Jail. We told you about Mark Goodrum, who was arrested for a misdemeanor pot charge, couldn't make $150 bail, had a heart attack, died in the jail, as well as this unknown female inmate whose information we still don't have, even though it's been months. We told you about how most of the board of trustees for the jail are your Hampton Roads City mayors, sheriffs, council people, and how the superintendent recently resigned, and how no fault has been found by anyone involved in any of these deaths. Tragedy. Complete travesty and a tragedy. And we'll wrap up old news with a little bit of good news. This week, the Virginia Board of Health voted Monday to remove contested regulations on abortion facilities that were deemed an undue burden on abortion access. The regulations required facilities that provide 5 or more abortions a month to meet hospital-like building standards, along with other restrictions. Now, you may have remembered from earlier this summer that similar Texas laws were struck down by the Supreme Court. The crux of the matter is that abortion opponents, since they can't repeal abortion, have come up with other ways to restrict access to women's health care. What they have claimed to do is that these restrictions or these guidelines or whatever you want to call them are in place to protect the health of the mother, when in fact it's just to restrict access. So, for example, one of the things that the court found, and John Oliver did a great segment on this on Last Week Tonight, there are more injuries and deaths during colonoscopies than there are during first trimester abortions. And for conservative abortion opponents to go in and say that this is to protect the health of the mother while they're just ignoring the, colonoscopy deaths, is proof that this is BS, for lack of a better term. It's garbage. And so the Supreme Court of the Supreme Court of the United States struck down the Texas laws, and it's just a matter of time before it's struck down everywhere. And so I think the Virginia Board of Health is just trying to get that out of the way now, because they know that it would just open them up to court cases, et cetera. And it's been an ongoing fight. Governor McAuliffe released a statement in support of it, calling it onerous regulations designed solely to reduce or outright remove access to essential reproductive health services for women across the Commonwealth. So, a little bit of good news, but we're going to take a break. When we get back, we're going to get into the cluster storm of stuff in the Richmond race and talk a little bit about Governor McAuliffe's unwanted attention in the Clinton email saga. And we'll get into that after a real short break. We'll be right back. This is the For Virginia podcast. we usually try and highlight one individual, for usually a politician, that deserves a public shaming. And this week is a repeat performance by Richmond mayoral candidate Joe Morrissey. Shame on you if you can't dance too. We have gone into detail on several different occasions about Joe Morrissey. He was a lawyer who was disbarred, who was rebarred or reinstated by the Supreme Court. He was a state delegate who was forced to resign his seat after he pled guilty to delinquency, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, as part of a plea deal involving sex with an underage staff member who is now his wife, Myrna Morrissey. He was caught with explicit texts and pictures of her on his phone, which he attempted to blame on her ex-boyfriend, apparently some super hacker or something like that. So he pled guilty. He stepped down from his delegate seat. While he was in jail, he won the special election for the seat as an independent. He is now currently the lead candidate in the Richmond mayoral race with a whopping 20%, because the Richmond mayor's race has 5 people in it right now. And just this week, he was accused by a client that he had propositioned her, exposed himself and propositioned her in his office. And when she refused him, he assigned his case to another lawyer within his firm, who then encouraged this woman to plead guilty to the charge of not returning a rental car or something along those lines. I'm just dumbfounded by this. It's just incredible. And there's a CBS video, Channel 6 out of Richmond. So he's in front of his house that he now shares with this woman who I believe is 20. They have 2 kids together. He's attempting to answer questions during this press conference, and his father-in-law starts screaming liar every time he starts speaking. It is surreal. So he moves the people, the reporters, into his house in order to give the press conference and gives this response to their questions. Here's what he says when asked about the charges.
What I'm accused of is a crime. That I forced this person into a plea agreement. That is absolutely false.
Now, I already told you what got into trouble with him before was that he was caught with explicit texts of his now wife while she was 17 years old. So the woman who has accused him actually has texts from Morrissey on her phone now where he's, quote unquote, being flirtatious, talking about panties or something. I don't have the details on it, but this is his response to questions about those texts.
While I don't recall the exact text, I don't deny them at all. What I do deny is ever having any contact with her outside of my office after that first day.
And you can't see it, but during that pause, he's looking up and to his right for what was that, 2 seconds before he responds. He's thinking very carefully about what he's about to say. And you really have to watch this clip. It is insane. Morrissey's sitting there trying to defend him, basically admitting to sending these texts to this woman, and his poor wife is just sitting behind him, and the look on her face. I really genuinely feel sorry for this woman. I bet it was a rough night in the Morsi house that night, to say the least. But this is the man who's most likely going to be the mayor of Richmond. And I got to correct myself from earlier. There's actually 8 people, 8 running for mayor in Richmond. And it's entirely likely that this guy will be able to get enough votes to escape from a runoff election. And I called this guy the Donald Trump of Virginia politics before. I mean, I didn't know it was going to be like ongoing like this, but based on his relationship with his now wife, I mean, who would imagine it would just be a matter of time? I mean, actually, it was 3 months. He was engaged to his wife, his now wife, for 3 months while she was pregnant with their second child. And I had to stop myself for a minute there because I'm actually conflating him with Donald Trump in my mind, and I wasn't sure. I had to think for a minute there. But yes, Joe Morsi was engaged for 3 months to his wife, who was pregnant with their second kid. Morsi has 5 kids by 3 women, if I recall correctly. He is 59 years old. She is 20. Do the math. That's 40 years, 39 years. This could be the mayor of Richmond. So if you are a mayoral candidate in Richmond right now, you guys seriously need to get together and somebody needs to fall on their sword, because this man cannot possibly be the mayor of Richmond. It will be a joke. He's like Rob Ford and Donald Trump rolled into one bag of, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I am completely just dumbfounded that people can get away with this stuff. I mean, it's ridiculous. I got to correct myself again. According to VPAT, there's only 7 people still in the race: John Bales, Jack Berry, Bobby Jones, Joe Morrissey, Michelle Mosby, LeVar Stoney, and Lawrence Williams. Lawrence Williams, you need to drop out, you and your $1,500. Michelle Mosby and Bobby Jones, you should probably back out as well, because you guys haven't even broken. Michelle, you got 35,000. You're kind of okay, but we're talking about 700,000 for LeVar Stoney. Joe's got almost 200, and Jack Berry's got 536. John Bales. I mean, somebody needs to figure something out. There needs to be a runoff at least. There's no way. There is no way, Richmond, you guys can let this happen. For the love of God, please. Please. I can only imagine what Dwight Jones, who's the current mayor of Richmond, decided not to seek re-election. I can only imagine like what's going through his head right now. Like, seriously. But before we move on to the next topic, I just want to encourage you, if you live in Richmond, you have to watch this video, because right after the last clip I played where he said that he didn't have any contact with this woman outside his office after the quote first day, like, what happened on that first day? Seriously. They try to follow up with some questions, comparing basically the text messages that he sent to this woman with the text messages that he sent to his wife. And she didn't like that at all, and basically kicked everybody out of the house after that. It's insane. It is seriously insane.
Well, I think we're in silly season out today. If you actually read the whole article, I'm almost embarrassed for the reporter. If you read the whole article, I supported Jill McCabe because she was the best candidate to be a state senator. Plain and simple. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's sexism or whatever, I was all about her. And it's unfortunate sometimes when you read the whole story, you find out there's no there. Most journalists would have not written the story, and it's just unfortunate. But it's politics we live in today. I'm sure next week they'll have me out in charge of Benghazi. It's just, it's the world we live in today. I think he went to McKeechin and Sasslaw, and they came to me for the final meeting. I say we met on March 7th, and that was the only time I ever met her husband. And no offense, it wasn't about her husband. It was about Jill, highly qualified. She's a medical doctor. She's a community leader. That's why we were supporting her. I mean, read the article. It actually says, you read the whole article, there is nothing there. It's just, presidential politics we live in today.
That was a response from Governor McAuliffe earlier this week to Republican accusations that there was some kind of inappropriate goings on with regards to his contributions to a state Senate race for Jill McCabe in 2015. McCabe, who lost her race, is married to Andrew McCabe, who is a high-ranking FBI official who was later promoted to deputy director and was given oversight into the Clinton email investigation. Now, as I've told you before, I listen to Hannity and Rush and all those other guys to kind of get some balance from my liberal echo chamber. But they're making it seem like this was some kind of quid pro quo, that basically McAuliffe gave $300,000 to this woman's race in order for her husband to not prosecute Hillary Clinton. But the fact of the matter is that at the time, the Clinton email investigation and scandal wasn't even a thing. So in order for McAuliffe to have masterminded something like this, he would have had to predicted that not only would Andrew McCabe get a promotion to deputy director, that he would also be put in oversight of an investigation which didn't exist at the time. And I know Hannity, for one, was talking about this $300,000 for state Senate district as if it never happens. But you have to remember that in 2015, the governor was very invested in gaining control of the state Senate in order to pass Medicaid expansion. And McCabe didn't win, even though she had $1.6 million in campaign contributions over her Republican challenger, Dick Black, who had about $848,000 according to VPAP. This is the same guy that actually went to Syria to meet with Bashar al-Assad, and because of that race, and I think there were a few others that we didn't win. Prince William County, I believe, was one of the other ones. But because we didn't maintain control of the Senate, we didn't have Medicaid expansion, and we've had many conversations about that. Matt Skeens was on the show several months ago, and we'll probably talk about Medicaid expansion more. We talked about it last week. We'll talk about it again. We'll keep talking about it until it gets done. But I'm talking about this tonight because I just want people to be aware of it, because just like this recent FBI announcement that dropped on Friday, where Comey informed the Senate that there were emails found on a computer belonging to Carlos Danger, a.k.a. Anthony Weiner, a.k.a. the husband of Huma Abedin, who is Hillary Clinton's trusted aide. I mean, you should have heard of the radio on Friday. They were foaming at the mouth. Hillary's going to jail. This is irrefutable proof. That's all they could talk about on Friday. And, 10 days from now, it's going to be completely forgotten. There's nothing to see there. I mean, I don't think so. I'm not trying to digress, but this is the kind of stuff that we have to deal with and be aware of. So again, Governor McAuliffe was involved with a group that contributed money, $465,000 in donations from a political action committee controlled by McAuliffe to Democratic state Senate candidate Jill McCabe, whose husband, Andrew McCabe, was a high-ranking FBI official at the time, who was later promoted to deputy director, which gave him oversight over the Clinton email investigation, which did not exist at the time that McAuliffe gave the donations. So unless McAuliffe is playing some kind of third-dimensional chess, this is a non-story. Now, the only thing that's significant in this is that Andrew McCabe probably should have considered recusing himself. I'm not sure. I've heard that argument made on the right. I don't really dismiss it outright. I'm just passing it on. But if your wife has received almost $500,000 in contributions from the Clintons' best friend, it might be worth noting. But anyways, we're going to be going over this for the next 10 days. Clinton's up, 12 points in Virginia. So as long as we beat Trump, we can we can talk about this at length all we want. But I think for most of you guys listening, it's not going to have any impact on how you're going to vote on November 8th. We'll get right back. We're going to close up the show and talk about voting news, some voter fraud news, registration news, and Supreme Court news. We'll be right back. This is the For Virginia Podcast. Few environmental updates. The Virginian Pilot reports that coal exports from Virginia continued to decline through the third quarter of this year, down 24.4% from the same period a year ago. Get this, Newport News, or the Hampton Roads area in general, is the biggest coal exporting port in North America, and exports were down 30% since 2015. Coal is dead, ladies and gentlemen. China knows it. The rest of the world knows it. It seems that a lot of people in the state and in the country are in denial about it and think that there's some kind of war on coal. But if you want to call it that, I will admit to waging a war on coal. We cannot afford to continue to pollute the environment with coal. And say what you will about natural gas, whether you're for it or against it, it's much cleaner, it's much cheaper. It's not as good as solar power or renewable energy, but we're getting there. Things are starting to turn around. But coal is dead, whether they know it or not. Want to blame Obama or Hillary Clinton for war on coal, go for it. But we've written at length about the General Assembly trying to extend tax subsidies for coal companies to save coal jobs, which the subsidies have been proven not to work. And they go to companies that lay off workers, shirk on their responsibilities to the environment and to their workers' retirements, claim bankruptcy, and try and spend millions of dollars in executive performance bonuses at the same time. It is truly disgusting. And all the time they're trying to do this, they're poo-pooing wind farms and solar panel farms and Dominion Power, doing everything they can to prevent people from putting panels on their roofs. I believe I read an article this week or last week that if the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't allow Dominion Power to put these power lines, distribution lines in over at Jamestown, the Dominion is saying that there's going to be rolling blackouts on the peninsula next year in Williamsburg and in Newport News and Hampton. You believe that? Do you believe that? We could have all these jobs, people putting solar panels on roofs at your house for free. You pay the power that you use. They sell the rest back to the utility. But Dominion has done everything they can to prevent that, and they've spent all the money they can on General Assembly races in order to buy politicians that will let them get away with it. I will not have it. In response to the declining coal industry, Governor McAuliffe has announced $6.6 million in grants to Southwest Virginia according to the Bristol Herald Courier. Is earmarked for Southwest Virginia communities impacted by disappearing jobs in industries such as coal, tobacco, and textiles. The old economy of Virginia is gone, quote, McAuliffe said, stressing the need to train workers for the thousands of open jobs in emerging fields such as drone operation and cybersecurity. I was at the cybersecurity conference at Jefferson Lab last month. I think he touted something like 20 or 30,000 unfilled jobs, $80,000 a year jobs. It was about cyber physical, which means all your infrastructure, nuclear power plants, water distribution, et cetera, and how they're vulnerable to hackers. There was a lot of talk about a attack by the Russians or whoever on Ukrainian power plants that basically shut power off to the country for several hours, or most of the country. But whether or not you're 60 years old, you're not going to retrain, but something has to happen to help save these communities. Otherwise, they're just going to reach out for Donald Trump or the next Donald Trump or whoever else is promising that he's going to save them. Moving on, Dominion has withdrawn requests to close a Chesapeake coal ash facility. They asked the Department of Environmental Quality to temporarily halt the permitting process to close Chesapeake coal ash landfills and ponds, which are the subject of a pending federal lawsuit over the contamination of the Elizabeth River. Not just the Elizabeth River, but also other tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay are involved in this. I think the James was one of the more recent ones that I'm aware of. And kudos to editorial in the Roanoke Times from authors Joyce Wall and Larry Cummings of the Roanoke Regional Chamber and Train, which I believe is an HVAC company. Virginia can grow clean energy business, cut energy costs, and create jobs. Roanoke Times. Kudos to you two. At the roundtable, the Chamber, Train, and other attendees talked about how growth in renewable energy and energy efficiency services is a win-win for the region and the state, bringing economic development and a bright future for workers today and for future generations. Renewable energy and energy efficiencies companies, including both producers and consumers on the residential and industrial scale, had the opportunity to show the governor and other elected leaders the considerable economic impact we are having on the region. Just look at North Carolina. Normally, I wouldn't encourage you to do that based on what's going on with their governor and their political races and LGBT stuff. But when it comes to solar jobs, they're actually doing pretty darn well as some of our other neighboring states. Google the Clean Power Plan or the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative for more details on that. We've talked about it at length. We'll most definitely get into it at another time. Speaking of LGBT, the Supreme Court of the United States has decided to take up the case of Gloucester transgender student Gavin Grimm, who sued the Gloucester County School Board for denying him access to the men's bathroom. Now, obviously, Mr. Grimm is going to be graduated from high school by the time this actually gets resolved. But the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond ruled that refusing to allow students to use the bathrooms corresponding to their gender identity would violate Title X, which bans sex discrimination by schools receiving federal funds. Now, Title X, I believe, is almost as old as I am. I'm sure it's at least 30 years old. And obviously, transgender rights wasn't an issue when it was implemented, and this is one of the main arguments for the opponents of this case. The Supreme Court denied an injunction that would have allowed Gavin to use the men's bathrooms during his time in school there, but it will likely go to the Supreme Court, and that will happen in 2017 at the earliest. If the court does tie, which I think would probably be the worst thing that would happen, but if the court does tie, the Fourth Circuit's decision will be upheld, or will stand rather, and that will open floodgates for transgender people to use the bathroom of their chosen sex at schools across the nation. And I'm sure people are going to freak out about it. But I am all for the right of transgender students or individuals to live their lives as they see fit. I mentioned North Carolina a few minutes ago. We've all seen what's happened over there after their governor basically allowed the bathroom bill law to be passed. And we saw the immediate and near universal condemnation of that law, along with several companies and organizations that are now refusing to do business with North Carolina. I saw one article while I was doing research earlier this week that decided to bring 825 jobs to Virginia rather than North Carolina because of this. We've seen the NAACP has canceled tournaments in North Carolina for next year's college basketball tournaments, and apparently basketball is a really big thing in North Carolina, and now they're not going to be there. So obviously Virginia's trying to pick up some of that basketball tournament fever, and we just can't make a similar mistake. So I think the transgender bathroom law is going to have a big impact on the state Senate race and the presidential race as well. I think Virginia's a foregone conclusion for Clinton this cycle, but if North Carolina goes for Clinton, I don't have the poll numbers in front of me, but it could very well be. It's definitely in play. But if North Carolina is denied to Donald Trump, he will not be president. I think everything I've read about electoral paths to victory, whether he wins Virginia or Ohio or Florida or Pennsylvania, he can lose one or more of those. But if he loses North Carolina, I don't think there's any way he can become president. And I don't think there's any way that he will become president. But that doesn't mean I'm taking anything for granted. And I've got a few voting related articles that we're going to talk about here real quick before we close out the show. So let's get to that. Probably should have included this in updates from old news because we have reported about this previously, but the Washington Times is reporting in depth about 30-year-old former Alexandria Vafale Massaquoi, who worked for liberal advocacy group New Virginia Majority and was arrested for forging voter information forms, filing false applications for people who do not exist. Now, my take on this is that this is obviously some kind of canvasser who was paid per registration, I'm guessing, and basically fudged his numbers. I'm just speculating completely. New Virginia Majority did not respond to comments for this Times article, but Anna Leader, who is the registrar for the city of Alexandria, said the group of questionable applications were turned over to the Commonwealth's Attorney Office for investigation. Commonwealth Attorney Brian Porter said no votes were cast, and that given the recent public attention to claims of election fraud, I think it is important to note that there is no allegation that any illegal vote was actually cast in this case. Furthermore, since the fraudulent applications involve fictitious people, had the fraud not been uncovered, the risk of actual fraudulent votes being cast was low. Now, I'm not sure this has gotten out to conservatives yet, but once they hear about this, God knows. We have enough of a hard time dispelling the myth of voter fraud when it's actually voter suppression. It's actually more dangerous to our democracy. But this is not really the kind of news we need. So, in other election news, the Virginia Elections Agency has temporarily banned Fairfax registrar from an email distribution list after he criticized the state's spotty computer systems. Article from Richmond Times says that the state has been plagued by IT problems in the run-up to election days, with system crashes forcing the state to extend the voter registration period last week. We did a report about that. There was an influx of interest in the registration process right before the deadline, which was last Friday. Last Friday. Basically, some groups sued the state. A judge allowed registrations to be extended for a few days, and they saw, I think it was 40, maybe 75,000 registrations that occurred. We've seen numerous articles about record-breaking registrations, and whether it's Republicans or Democrats remains to be debated at this point. We'll have to wait till November 8th or 9th to find out. But we've seen numerous. It's a good thing. I'm hoping it's a good thing that we're seeing all this interest in the voting process and all these people coming out to do early voting and in-person absentee voting. But this individual, this Fairfax guy, Cameron Sassnet, apparently was banned from the listserv for using unprofessional or discourteous language in his communications. Sassnet acknowledged he could have worded his email differently, but said he feels state officials saw his choice of language as an opportunity to, quote, silence anything that I have to say. Tried to apologize, but was bounced from the list. Probably not the best way to handle this from the Board of Elections people, but stuff is getting really testy. I told you last week about the Second Amendment advocate who sat outside a Virginia Congress candidate's office with a gun in his pickup truck for about 12 hours one day. We've got Trump's appeals to go to the polls and watch people, their voter intimidation and suppression efforts. This is really stressful on the actual people who are involved with the election, the registrars and the volunteers that are at the polls. I mean, we've got questions. Heard a NPR article about whether it's legal to bring a gun to the polls. Apparently, if the poll is at a school, then it's not allowed. People are going to challenge it anyways, because whether it's a school at the time that an election is happening or not. But the point is that if you go to a polling place that's on private property, the property owner, church or whoever, has the distinction of whether or not a weapon is allowed. So I can only imagine what's going to happen. I did some research, read an article about the fact that the first year that we had an election, a federal election in the United States, that someone was not murdered at the polls was 1896. So we've had just over 100 years of peace during our election process, and damned if it doesn't look like we might be set to break that record. And I love to end the show on a positive note, so we're going to end this week with our fame of the week. We're a big fan of transparency and open government here at Fort Virginia, and we got to give props to the city of Virginia Beach, who have opened their OpenVB data portal just this week. So it is a repository for data published by the city of Virginia Beach. Provides easy access to open data and information about your city government, including public safety, business, finance, government, neighborhoods, and environment data. This is huge. I'm a big data guy. Actually just finished a project this past weekend for my ODU course. But having access to this kind of information allows people to go in and do analysis with the same information that the government has. We've seen a lot of trends on this with, health data, foreign governments, federal government, states. There's all kinds of statistical analyses that you can do, and having access to this data, I don't know if it's going to make things worse or better, statistics, how to lie with statistics. But I think having access as a citizen to this information and being able to view it, make your own insights into it, it's a great thing. Most of the articles we hear about transparency and open government are usually about how the state or municipalities try to fight freedom of information requests. I think this is really the heart of the Clinton email scandal by the right, is that the reason that the email server was set up in the first place was that so that she could avoid this kind of transparency and stuff like that. And, say what you will about WikiLeaks. I'm not going to get too far into it. Their argument, according to Assange's essay from 10 years ago, was that he wants to root out corrupt organizations by making the cost of secrecy so high that they can no longer be effective. And again, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but again, kudos to the city of Virginia Beach for making their information open and their data available to anyone who knows what to do with it. And with that, we've got to wrap it up. That's all the time we've got for this week. We appreciate everyone that tuned in. Thank you for your support and all your shares. So please check out our website, share us on social media, and your financial support is always appreciated. This is the For Virginia Podcast, episode 11. Submit your feedback on our website, on Facebook, or by emailing info@forvirginia.org. We'll continue to work hard to bring you the news, information, and analysis to help keep the progressive revolution moving forward in Virginia through 2017 and beyond. My name is Michael Brandon Wade. Thank you. We'll see you next week.